Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Redemption Church. It's great to have you join us today. We know this has been a strange season for all of us, and we're so grateful for your prayers and your patience and your flexibility as we've navigated these waters. And we know we're all getting anxious to be gathering again here in this building soon, and we're hopeful that we'll have some information and updates for you very soon on what that will look like. But for today, we're glad you've joined us as we continue in our series in the book of Ruth. And also, we've got another story of redemption today, as we have someone from our body share their story of how God has worked in their lives. So thanks for joining us today. Enjoy the service, and God bless.
Good morning, Redemption Church. I hope that you have been enjoying the beautiful sunshine and wind and rain and every other season that Colorado has been throwing at us the past couple of weeks. As we worship today and as we listen for some of the last words from Ruth, from Nate, I just want to invite you all to remember that we serve a faithful God, that we serve a God who has been working to redeem his people since the very start of creation, from Adam and Eve in the garden to his followers in Egypt, to ultimately culminating in Jesus Christ, who came and died on the cross to redeem us when we were not worthy. So as we worship today, let's remember that we serve a faithful God, that we serve a loving God, that we serve a good God.
Nothing can separate. Even if I ran away, your love never fails. I know I still make mistakes, but you have new mercies for me every day. Your love never fails. Sing, you say. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Sing the wind. The wind is strong and the water's deep, but I'm not alone here in these open seas. Your love never fails. The chasm is far too wide. I never thought I'd reach the other side. Your love never fails. Sing, you say. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. I sing, you make. 'Cause you make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You stay the same through the ages. Your love Your love never fails. Your love never fails. Your love never fails.
My name's Mark Gilseth. Sorry about my pronunciations. My left side of my face is pretty numb, so it's hard to talk. I was very fortunate. I was born to a Christian family. We went to a mission field when I was younger in Colombia, South America. When we returned from Colombia, I was diagnosed with leukemia. At that time, there really wasn't, that was 1970. No time really. Time hadn't gone by to where they knew much of anything about it. And so it was all experimental. And you could say it was, oh, that was a bad thing, but at such a young age, I really knew God. Doctors, everyone was telling me, you're probably gonna die, this isn't looking good. I was in a study group, and after there were 16 kids with cancer, there was only about, I think after 20 months, there was 2 of us. So you knew it was real. I learned early that God is what people had been telling me, my relatives, my parents. I came to the realization that it's you and him. People can help you, whatever, but not like he could. I was faced with some difficulties. I had to do chemotherapy for 4 years straight, every day. And then later, of course, it's caused all kinds of problems like the one I have right now. I learned that God was, it was a real deal right off the bat. I had to believe, you know. And that's the number one thing, is just believe what he tells you. And he's told you everything in the Bible. Don't worry about anything. Life for me is, God is real. And I don't even have a slightest doubt. He's shown me over and over. There's been some tough days, but I really can honestly say, when you do accept Christ, you are dead to you. It's not about me anymore. It's about God's use of me. Things have happened to people all through the Bible, awful things. It's how, if you really have faith in the Lord, it doesn't really matter. Whatever his will is, you need to go with, believe that he says he uses everything for good. Today's the day the Lord hath made. Be glad and rejoice in it. There is not a bad day, even though we feel like it, there is. But yeah, and somehow I've had half of my life seem horrible, but the other half has been awesome. Have the faith that God is in control. God could be using whatever's happening to you for something that you don't know anything about, and you're working for him. Do what he wants, you know.
You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust.
Standing on this mountaintop, looking just how far we've come, knowing that for every step you were with us. Kneeling on this battleground, seeing just how much you've done, knowing every victory was your power in us. Scars and struggles on the way, but with joy our hearts can say, Yes, our hearts can say, never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did you leave us on our own. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. Kneeling on this battleground, seeing just how much you've done, knowing every victory is your power in us. Scars and struggles on the way, but with joy our hearts can say, yes, our hearts can say, never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did you leave us on our own. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. Scars and struggles on the way, but with joy our hearts can say, never once did we ever walk alone. Carried by your constant grace, held within your perfect peace. Never once, no, we never walk alone. Never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did you leave us on our own. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. Every step we are leading in your grace. Evermore we'll be breathing out your praise. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. You are faithful, God, you are faithful. You are faithful, God, you are faithful.
Well, good morning, church family. It is an honor and pleasure to be back together this morning and continue on in our story and journey through the book of Ruth. And so if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Ruth chapter 4. If you were with us and watched last week, you saw we looked at a really interesting story as Ruth kind of takes the advice of Naomi. She goes down and makes herself available, lets her intentions be known to Boaz, and Boaz is just, he's captivated by her. He wants to marry her, but we saw his character, his integrity as he wants to do things the right way. And our passage kind of ended last week with Boaz making this promise that he was going to see Ruth and Naomi redeemed. And then she returned home and Naomi said, we can trust our Redeemer. He's going to take care of us. And so we find ourselves this morning at picking up that story. It is the next morning, and now our focus is going to shift from Ruth and Naomi to Boaz. And what is Boaz doing with his morning? Can he be trusted? Is he going to act and redeem Ruth and Naomi? And is this story going to continue making its way from broken to beautiful, as we've seen throughout this story? And so in Ruth chapter 4, we're going to jump in and really look at the faithful wisdom of Boaz all throughout the first half of chapter 4. And so let's just dive right in. Ruth 4, verses 1 and 2 says, Boaz had gone up to the gate, and he sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. let's just pause right here as our story kind of gets going this morning, and we see that Boaz indeed did wake up. He made his way down to the gate, and this is a common place where legal transactions and business was done in the city of Bethlehem. And so it says that he makes his way to the place where they can settle things in a courtroom-like process. And what we're seeing here is Boaz has made a plan. He knows that he's going to handle this, and the way that he's going to handle this redemption process with Ruth is in a legal way. And so he's making his way to the right place. And if you're taking notes, I want you to write that down, that as we strive to be people who want to act faithfully and full of wisdom, the first thing we see in Boaz's life is he's in the right place. If we want to be people who act in faithful wisdom, we need to be in the right place at the right time. And Boaz is. He's made his way to the gate to handle things legally, rightly. That's been his entire motivation the whole time, is he knows what he wants, but he wants to do it correctly. And then the author says something kind of interesting in the second half of verse 1. He says, "Behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by." Our author here is using a bit of irony to our Jewish audience. He's getting them to play on their own beliefs and their own emotions by making this sound like it was a circumstantial thing, that it was a coincidence that the Redeemer happened by, that he came by. This would have brought about a little bit of frustration, a little bit of outrage to the original readers of the story of Ruth, that they would have felt, wait a second, what do you mean the Redeemer came by? God is sovereign and in control. This is God's story, and Boaz is acting rightly, and he's in the right place. Of course the Redeemer is going to show up. And using the art of subtlety, even in the language here, our author is getting the readers to be reminded of God's sovereignty and his interaction, his providence, his provision throughout this story, that this is God's story. It's not Boaz's story. And so Boaz is in the right place, and the Redeemer walks by. And this is where our language gets a little bit interesting. It says, Boaz said, "Turn aside, friends." As we've been studying the book of Ruth a few different times, we've seen where our English language kind of can let us down a little bit. It can leave us wondering or asking maybe some questions. It sounds like here Boaz is being very kind and extending a warm and inviting phrase here by saying, "Turn aside, friend." It sounds like he's being very cordial to this nearer Redeemer. But in fact, when you go back and study the Hebrew, he's actually being a little dismissive of our Redeemer. We're going to call him Jed this morning. We don't have his name, so I just made up a name. We're going to call him Jed. He just says friend. He doesn't give him a name. He doesn't give him an identity. He doesn't give any more information. And realistically, the word here, friend, is kind of a, hey, buddy, hey, pal, Mr. So-and-so, come on over and have a seat. And our author also is a little dismissive in that we're not given any context as to who this nearer Redeemer is. He's not a major character in our story. And so he's invited over. And what I want us to draw our attention to is not just how Boaz speaks to him, but the way in which this nearer Redeemer responds. It says he turned aside and sat down. We see the character of Boaz all throughout the story of Ruth, but here this morning we're going to see Boaz's leadership, that people respond. He's a man not just of character, but he's very well respected and he's listened to. He's a leader. When this guy gets told, "Come sit down," this man listens. And then not only that, but Boaz goes and finds 10 elders and he says, "Come sit down over here," and they listen. Boaz is a well-respected man, and just for a moment, I want us to think about, who would have to ask you, you're going about your day, just kind of living your life, and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, do you want to come serve on a jury? Come give up half your morning, sit at the front of this gate, and listen and be a witness, and possibly have to get called back later for different interactions to testify on my behalf." Who would have to ask you to do that? The two thoughts that came to my mind is either somebody in a position of authority and power over you, or somebody who's a great friend. And I think what we see here as these elders, these Jewish men, respond and listen to Boaz is Boaz is both of those things. He's both an authority and a respected man, but also I think we'll see at the end of our story this morning that they love Boaz. They're for Boaz. And so they come, they sit down, and Boaz finds himself acting full of faithful wisdom in the right place. And so this morning, I want to ask you a question. How can you strive to be in the right place, focused on God's will and God's ways, and find yourself not distracted and led astray, but as Boaz is seeking to act wisely and faithfully to redeem the woman that he's fallen in love with, he acts wisely and he puts himself in the right place at the right time. And then in verse 3 through 8, we're going to see that he has the right perspective. As the story continues on, he says to the Redeemer, Naomi, who's come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. Boaz here launches right into the heart of the issue. He doesn't make small talk. He doesn't mince words. He gets right to his goal. He knows where he's going. We talked about last week that I didn't think they got a whole lot of sleep the night before, that Ruth was overwhelmed and overjoyed with the fact that this morning her entire life was going to change. And I think Boaz was laying there planning and thinking about the end goal. He wants to redeem Ruth. And what does he need to do to get to that prize at the end of the day? And so he's got the right perspective. He knows what he's going to do. And the way that he starts here is by getting this Redeemer, our boy Jed, to think emotionally. And so he presents him with this opportunity that there's this field available from their relative Elimelech. Again, this morning, culturally, we need to do some homework. We need to kind of understand and bridge the gap and what is happening here, because I don't think what's happening is Naomi is actually selling any land. This is a culture where she would not have had the right to sell the land. She would not have been respected enough or treated like she had that ability. And there's been no evidence thus far that they had any land. They've been dependent on Boaz and his generosity and Ruth's hard work gleaning and gathering in the fields. And so there's been no evidence to this. But I think what happened, and as I studied some commentaries this week, what kind of is understood to be the case is when Elimelech led his family out of Bethlehem and into Moab, he had a field, and he either sold it or he just abandoned it. And it has found its way into the hands of somebody outside of their clan, outside of their tribe and their people. But they legally have the right to this land. And so what Boaz is saying basically is he draws Jed over, is he says, there's this field and you can acquire it from Naomi. You have the right to bring it back into our family. There's a free field or a very cheap field that you have the right to ahead of everybody else. Would you like it? And if you like it, you've got to act right now. Don't miss that. He says, buy it in the presence of those sitting here right now in front of the elders of my people. If you're going to redeem it, redeem it. You've got to act now. It's much like I love watching infomercials. I love watching, if you buy or act now, and I love trying to guess, what's the, but wait, you get more. You'll double your set of steak knives and get a paring knife and some sunglasses. Like they just keep throwing in more and more and more, and they get you on the hook. That's what Boaz is trying to do now. He's playing on this man's emotions. He wants him to feel emotionally like, this is such a great opportunity. Because I believe what's happening, Boaz has the right perspective. He knows what he wants, and it's not the field. And if he can get this man acting emotionally, wisdom will go out the window. Responsibility will go out the window, and he will no longer act patiently or act logically. And I'm not saying that Boaz isn't emotional. Boaz is a man full of emotions. Emotions are good and a gift from God. I think Boaz here is playing on this man's emotions to get him to operate in a way that puts Boaz where he wants to go. This is such a wise and well thought out plan. It's kind of like, so, confession time. A couple of weeks ago, we woke up on a Saturday morning, and my wife called me to the kitchen, and she noticed some water pouring out from under our fridge. And the fridge had some problems in the past. Some things had been broken for a long time, and I just kind of had ignored them. And so when I saw water leaking out onto my floor, I pulled the fridge out, looked at the water line behind the fridge that goes to the water in the ice maker, didn't see any leaks from the water line, and thought, oh, well, great, there goes my Saturday. We got to go buy a new fridge. And we kind of had a busy day, and so we crammed it into our busy Saturday. We rushed to the store. We found a fridge. We bought a fridge. I asked a buddy who owns a pickup truck, would you come and help me in the midst of a monsoon, of a rainstorm? Would you come help me pick up this fridge? Would you fight the elements to get it back to my house, and then try not to drown as we unload this fridge from the back of your pickup truck into my house? We had to let it dry out for a day. It dried out the next day. I relied on another buddy of mine, almost crippled him, had to take my house apart because the fridge wouldn't fit through my doors. It was this massive ordeal. Finally got the new fridge in place. 45 minutes goes by after we plug and power everything up and get everything going, and my wife calls me back into the kitchen. She says, babe, there's still water pouring out from under the fridge. And so I pull the fridge back out, and because I acted a little slower, a little more patiently, a little less emotionally, I found the hole in my water line. And so I went through all of this time, all of this energy, a ton of money, almost broke a buddy of mine, and I didn't need a new fridge. I operated out of emotions. I saw my fridge was broke. I got frustrated and just said, you know what, I'm done with this fridge. Let's just go buy a new one. And that didn't really fix my problem. I wasn't acting patiently. I wasn't acting with the right perspective. I was just acting off of my emotions and my frustration, and I couldn't control myself. And we ended up spending way more time and money and energy and effort than we ever really had to. It was a $4 fix that still had to be made after all of that work. I think one of the things we see here is Boaz has the right perspective. He's not being led by his emotions, and he's getting this man to be ruled by his emotions. He's so excited at this unbelievable opportunity, and he's got to act now, and we see that he's willing to. He says, I will redeem it at the end of verse 4. This is too good to be true. I was just rolling through town on my way to the market, and you're going to give me a field? Heck yeah, I am in. And as readers, we're almost left, if we're just taking our time through this passage, you're going, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's not supposed to get the girl. This is not the redeemer we want. This is like the villain winning at the end of a movie. He's not supposed to redeem Ruth. It's supposed to be Boaz. Luckily, Boaz doesn't leave us on the hook for too long, because verse 5, he says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi. So today, you have to make your decision right now. You have to act now. He pulls but wait, there's more. There's more. Just like in an infomercial, there's more. Not only do you get a field, he says, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, this foreign widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. You have to act now. Not only do you get a field, but you also get a brand new wife. And oh, by the way, you have to give her offspring and then give them half your inheritance. They have every right. You're to restore and redeem their legacy. This is the ultimate, whoa, you've played on my emotions. You had me so excited, and now this is going to cost me a great deal. Boaz knew what he was doing. He had the right perspective. He got this man to act on his emotions, to get him to feel really the weight that this was going to cost if he was to be the Redeemer. And what we see is this, for our boy Jed, my made-up name for our Redeemer, is too much for him to bear. In verse 6, the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. He passes on this opportunity. He doesn't pick up the phone and make the phone call and give them their credit card information. It's too great. He can't do it. He doesn't see the value. He doesn't have the same perspective as Boaz does, and he can't do it. And while it's real easy to judge this guy and go, man, you pass, like, especially as we look next week and we see what the legacy of Ruth is going to become. But I want you to think for just a second. Let's remember, this is a real story and real people at a real time in a real place. This guy was making his way through town. Some powerful man has assembled a jury and calls him over and says, sit down here, buddy. I've got the opportunity of a lifetime. You get a field. Oh, man, I want a field. That sounds great. I'll take it. Oh, by the way, you get a wife. And you've got to have kids with her. And then you've got to share your kingdom, your inheritance with this lady and her kids. This dude was walking through town, and this opportunity came into his lap. Can you imagine? I want us not to think about Boaz. I don't want us to think about Ruth or Naomi, even Jed. Think about Jed's wife. He just said that this is, take my right of redemption. I don't want to redeem it, lest I hurt my own inheritance. I think this guy's got a family at home. And he doesn't want to have to split it up between his family that he already has. That's too great of a cost for him. Imagine, for just a moment, you're this guy's wife. He left, whether to go to work or the market or maybe to the temple to offer a sacrifice. We don't know where he's going. But he left the house in the morning. And he comes home with a field and a new wife who's, oh yeah, a Moabite. She's not welcome in Bethlehem in the clan of Israel. She's not the right people group. And oh yeah, now your husband has to have kids with this new wife, and your inheritance for your kids is going to get split with their kids. Can you imagine how she would have felt? About a year ago, I went to Sam's Club to get some pancake mix. And I don't know what it is. I like to claim it's the Holy Spirit, that whenever I'm at Sam's Club, I have to go through the TV section. It's the Spirit leading me. I have to go through. And I was there by myself, and I made my way through, like I always do, the electronics and the TV section. And I had this great, ginormous TV on ultra huge mega clearance discount. And I found myself, much like Boaz, in the right place at the right time. And I did the right thing. And I bought pancake mix and a ginormous TV. And I came home and told my wife, hey, look, babe, I bought this massive TV. It was a great deal. And I have a very loving, very gracious wife, and we processed through that decision, and I think she would probably say maybe I didn't have the right perspective. But for a long time we joked that I was not allowed to go to Sam's unsupervised anymore, that I needed to have an adult with me because I couldn't be trusted to not come home with some new gadget, some new toy, something that caught my eye when I was just going in for like eggs and pancakes, and I came home with a TV. Could you imagine how long it would be for this guy to be able to go to the market without his wife if he came home with a new field and a new family? And now they have less money because you've got to share it with this whole new... It's easy to judge this guy. I just want us to remember, this guy has a different perspective. This guy's not supposed to be the Redeemer. He's not supposed to be the one to rescue Naomi and Ruth. God has a different plan, and he's using the wisdom and perspective of Boaz to help this Redeemer take himself out of the running. And that's exactly what happens. And then verse 7, we get some background, we get some context of what's happening, and kind of the final courtroom scene as now the legal process is completed. In verse 7 and 8, our author is going to tell us that this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. So there's this really interesting practice that our author tells us about, and this is how kind of this section of the story comes to a close. Is Jed, our other Redeemer, says, "I can't do it," and he takes off his sandal and he gives it to Boaz. And originally I thought, wow, that's really interesting, that's kind of weird, but the more I sat with this concept, with this practice, with this signifying the end of a transaction, this became so beautiful to me. That Jed, the Redeemer who's not willing to walk this road and redeem Ruth and Naomi, not willing to share his inheritance. It's too big of a price. It's too big of an ask. It's not his perspective. It's not his plan. He takes off his sandal and he hands it to Boaz. And he says, "This is yours. You walk the road I can't walk. I'm not willing to go there. I'm unable to go there. Will you go there for me? You have the right now. I'm not going to do it." How beautiful is it that from now on, Boaz has a symbol. He has proof that there was a Redeemer and I bought the rights. I have the rights. I'm going to walk that road. I'm going to do what the other Redeemer was unwilling to do, what the other Redeemer was unable to do. It's not too high of an ask for me. It's not too big of a cost. I'm willing to walk that road. What a beautiful picture of redemption. And if we step back for just a second, we can marvel at Jesus, who walked a path we could not walk. We deserved to walk it. We earned our place being separated from God by our rebellion, as living as enemies of His. And Jesus comes and He says, "Give me your sandals. Let me walk this road. You cannot do what needs to be done, but I am more than capable. I am more than able. It's not too big of an ask. It's not too big of a sacrifice. I love you so much." For Boaz, this was an easy decision, and we'll see that in a moment. For Jesus, it was a decision to come after us. And was it difficult? Was it painful? Absolutely. But it wasn't too high a price. You were worth it to Jesus. And it's such a beautiful picture of redemption that Jesus walks the road for us in our place. And Boaz here gets a sandal, and he's going to walk in the place of this other Redeemer. And so Boaz now has the right. He had the right perspective. He knew what he wanted to do. And now he's so overjoyed that as he turns to the crowds, as he turns to the elders, he's now going to fill them in on not just the what, but the why, what his purpose was in this whole legal process. Look with me in verse 9. It says, "Boaz said to the elders and all the people, 'You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon.'" We finally learned which one she was married to. "I've bought her to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead, that they may not be cut off from among their brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Boaz not only has found himself in the right place, not only does he have the right perspective, but now we see that he's driven by the right purpose. For Boaz, it was not about the field. He didn't care about some piece of land or property. He wants to preserve the legacy of Elimelech. And he wants, the prize for him is Ruth. He wants to be married to Ruth. He says, "This day I've bought her to be my wife." And in a culture that is so male-dominated, in a culture that didn't think highly of women, here we get a sense that for Boaz, he thinks so much of Ruth. That's what this whole thing has been about. He wanted her. She was the prize. She was his purpose. He was after her, and now he's eager, he's willing to lay down his inheritance, to share his wealth, his kingdom, his fortune, because she's so worth it. He's willing to restore and redeem the legacy and the story of Elimelech, which we'll see next week is really what this whole book has been building towards, and what the whole purpose of the story of Ruth is going to be about legacy. And Boaz is eager and willing. That's been his purpose from the onset, is I want Ruth. And so now that he's won, he's accomplished his goal. He set out with a plan, he worked the plan, and he's seen it through. He won the day, and he can't help but say, oh man, this is so exciting. You guys are my witnesses. I get Ruth. This is what I wanted from the beginning. And as we talk about being people who walk in faithful wisdom, I want us to be driven by right purposes and not allow temporal things to cloud out or distract us from the eternal. We see that Boaz has not only the right perspective, but he also has the right purpose. And so he told us about the what, and then he gave us insight as to the why behind his plan. And my question for you this morning is, what's your why? What makes you tick? What is your purpose? What are you aiming and striving towards? And how is that in line with God's will and God's plans and God's purposes for your life? And where are those things that are maybe distracting you? Those things that are maybe leading you on a path that isn't on purpose for a purpose? As I think about what it looks like for us to live a life on purpose and on mission, and we should be about the things Jesus charged us to, that we should love God, that we should love people, and that we should be his witnesses to the end of the earth. If we are going to walk in faithful wisdom, we need to have the right purpose, and that purpose is the one that Jesus himself gave us. See that Boaz has the right purpose, he's had the right perspective, and now finally we see in verse 11 and 12 that he surrounded himself with the right people. Verse 11 says, all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who's coming into your household like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. As our scene kind of draws to a close, and as we'll pause and pick up the rest of the story next week, I just want us to see a few things very quickly at the end of this, as Boaz has gone out and found these elders, these men who would give up part of their day to come and be his witnesses. The first thing they say is, yes, we're your witnesses. We will testify on your behalf. We're for you, Boaz. This is their way of affirming all that they've seen. His plan, his perspective, his purpose, they're for it. They're excited about it. And then they pray this blessing. And notice who they pray the blessing over first. May the Lord make the woman who's coming into your house like Rachel and Leah. This is the same woman who at the beginning of our story leaves Moab broken with very little hope for a future. There was not much for her in Bethlehem from her perspective. Yet she loved and was for Naomi. She's a woman of noble character. And now we get these men of good standing, these elders in Bethlehem, these good Jewish men saying, we pray, may the Lord make Ruth like Rachel and Leah, the matriarchs of the house of Israel. They're praying that God would open up her womb. If you remember back at the beginning of our story, Ruth was married to Mahlon for 10 years and had no children. God had closed her womb. Now these men are saying, may the Lord in his sovereignty open up her womb and make her fruitful, like Rachel and Leah, who are the matriarchs. They're the pinnacle of motherhood for Israel. They looked up to them, they esteemed them, they respected them, and that's what they want for this Moabite woman. God is taking her broken past and making it beautiful. And now you get these Jewish men wanting beautiful things for this outsider, this foreign woman, because Boaz has redeemed her. Then they don't stop at praying that blessing over Ruth, but now they're going to pray a blessing over Boaz as well. They say, may you act worthily. That's essentially them saying, may God make you wealthy and strong in our town. And not only that, but would you be renowned in Bethlehem? That word renowned is essentially famous. They want people talking about Boaz's story, which I think is beautiful because Boaz has gone to such great lengths to make sure that Elimelech and Mahlon and Kilion's story and legacy is preserved through Ruth. He wants to make sure, and he's willing to act as the redeemer for their story. And they're saying, we want people to know about you. And this just struck me as I was preparing for this today. In us studying this prayer gets yet again fulfilled and realized. That in us talking about Boaz, their prayer that he would be made famous comes to pass. It's so beautiful, this prayer. And then they pull out an interesting reference to me. They say, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. If you want to experience some of the real nitty-gritty rawness of the Bible, the story God wrote, I'd encourage you to go back and read Genesis 38. If you thought last week was a little weird and a little bit raw, go read Genesis 38 and what happens between Tamar and Judah. Judah is Tamar's father-in-law, and she tricks him into impregnating her. She gives birth to twins, one of whom's name is Perez. Again, go back and read it. Very interesting, very raw, very real in the Bible. But here's what's cool. As time has passed, these men, these elders in Bethlehem, say, you know what? There's this really messed up, broken story between a daughter-in-law and a father-in-law. And it ends up with these twins. But because one of them, Perez, ends up essentially the father of Bethlehem, Elimelech and Boaz come from this guy's tribe, his clan, they see beautiful things that have come out of that broken situation. And these elders in Bethlehem say, Boaz, just like that story was broken, but beautiful things have come out of that painful past. We pray, we hope, we believe that God is going to use the brokenness of Ruth's story, the pain of Ruth's story, and there's going to be beautiful offspring. There's going to be much to celebrate about the goodness of Yahweh, the God of Israel, because he takes broken things and makes them beautiful. And so they point to this interesting story that as time has passed and they've seen God act, there's much beauty. And then they say that the offspring of the Lord will give you by this young woman. They want to see her womb again opened. This whole story really has been building towards the climax of legacy, that this is about the generations to come. And we'll look at that more next week. But what I really want us to marvel at is how Boaz has surrounded himself by people who affirm, who bless, who speak life and truth into his decisions. That as he's acting faithfully and wisely, there are men around him who are going, yes and amen. You're on the right track. Keep on keeping on. They believe in him. They affirm him. They bless him. They pray over him. And so another question I would have for you is, who is a person of peace in your story that speaks life and truth. And then maybe on the other side of the spectrum, who maybe has a voice that's a little louder than it should be? Who maybe has a voice that shouldn't have that influence, doesn't speak life, doesn't speak truth, doesn't encourage, doesn't build up? And maybe their voice, like Orpah, or even like our other Redeemer, who just kind of fades out of the story, maybe their voice needs to be smaller and more of a whisper in your story. Boaz, as he's sought to act in faithful wisdom, we've seen him in the right place with the right perspective and the right purpose, surrounded by the right people. And as we've done in weeks past, I want us, as we come kind of to a close, I want us to take a step back. And I want us to marvel not just at this love story, this story of redemption, but the greatest love story, the greatest story of redemption. And as we've seen the past few weeks, I want us yet again to marvel at Jesus, who is the far better Boaz. That if we can look at Boaz's story and see that he was at the right place at the right time to redeem Ruth. And then he had the right perspective. He knew what he was going to do, and he worked his plan wisely and flawlessly. And that his purpose was never distracted. He never wandered from it. He knew not just what he was going to do, but why he was going to do it. And then he surrounded himself with people to affirm and support and come alongside that decision. If we can marvel at that in Boaz's story, let us take a step back and all the more marvel at Jesus, who came at the exact right time to redeem us, to overcome our sin problem, who came knowing what he had to do, that ultimately his life, his ministry led to a horrific, painful death on a cross. Not only did he know what he had to do, but he knew why he had to do it, because in his kingdom, in his eyes, you and I were worth it. He doesn't need you, he wants you. You were worth it for him to work the plan that led to his death. You were the why. I was the why. And then just like Boaz surrounded himself with the right people, we see, and we just spent almost a year and a half studying the book of Acts recently, looking at how when Jesus leaves the tomb, the grave is empty, and he goes to prepare a place for us, he unleashes his disciples, the apostles, to go and be his faithful witnesses to the ends of the earth. And this morning we gather, albeit virtually, we gather and we celebrate because they were the right people to take his message from a small town and unleash it on the world. And as those of us who've been invited into a relationship with Jesus, the far better Boaz, we find ourselves now, because of his redeeming act, becoming right people to go share that same story with those around us, in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our workplaces. We are now Jesus' right people, called to the right purpose with the right perspective, and watch as God puts you in the right place at the right time to act faithfully, full of wisdom, as he gets the credit and the glory. And so my hope, my prayer for us, church, as we are hopefully coming out of a tough and trying season, is that we would be looking for the right place with the right perspective, making his purpose our purpose, and that we would come back together with right people, God's people, that the church would gather together again, that we would celebrate, we would magnify, we would glorify, and we would make him known as we marvel at the God who takes broken things and makes them beautiful. And we worship Jesus, the far, far better Boaz.
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. And here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood.
Sing, O grace.
Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love.
Sing, prone to wander.
Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love.
One more time.
Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Here's my heart.
Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. And here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It was great to have you with us. We hope that you have a great week. And again, we hope to be in touch soon with updates on how we might be able to meet in person in the very near future. But for now, thanks for joining us online. Know that we're praying for you, we love you, and we miss you, and we hope to see you soon. God bless.